I always loved camping, ever since I was a kid. My dad used to take me to different state parks and teach me how to pitch a tent, start a fire, and enjoy nature. He passed away last year, and I decided to honor his memory by going on a solo camping trip to one of his favorite places. Canopolis Lake State Park in Kansas. Arrived at the park on a sunny afternoon and checked in at the ranger station. The ranger gave me a map and told me to pick any campsite I wanted, as long as it was not reserved. He also warned me to be careful of the wildlife, especially the coyotes and the rattlesnakes. I thanked him and drove to the campground, which was near the lake. There were a few other campers around, but I wanted some privacy, so I chose a spot that was far from the others, surrounded by trees and rocks. I set up my tent, unpacked my gear, and made a small fire. I cooked some hot dogs and beans, and ate them while watching the sunset over the lake. It was a beautiful sight, and I felt a wave of peace and gratitude. I wished my dad was here with me, but I also felt his presence in my heart. I cleaned up my dishes, put out the fire, and crawled into my sleeping bag. I read a book for a while, then turned off my flashlight and fell asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but it was pitch dark outside. I heard a noise that sounded like a branch snapping. I thought it was probably a deer or a raccoon, and I tried to go back to sleep. But then I heard another noise closer to my tent. It sounded like footsteps, heavy and slow. I felt a surge of fear, and I grabbed my flashlight and my pocket knife. I wondered if it was a bear, or a mountain lion, or maybe a person. I hoped it was not a person. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it at the tent flap. I saw a shadow moving outside, blocking the light. It was big, and it had horns. I gasped, and the shadow stopped. It seemed to sense my presence, and it made a low growl. I realized it was not an animal, or a person. It was something else, something I had never seen before. It was a monster. I panicked and I screamed. I stabbed the tent flap with my knife, hoping to scare it away. But it did not flinch. It ripped the tent open with its claws, and I saw its face. It had red eyes, a snout, and sharp teeth. It looked like a goat, but it was not a goat. It was the devil. It lunged at me, and I tried to fight back. I slashed at it with my knife, but it did not seem to hurt it. It grabbed me by the neck and lifted me off the ground. I felt its breath on my face, and its teeth on my throat. I choked, and I felt blood gushing out of me. I knew I was going to die, and I prayed for mercy. I thought of my dad, and I hoped he was waiting for me in heaven. But then I heard a gunshot. The monster dropped me, and I fell to the ground. I looked up, and I saw a flash of light. It was the ranger, holding a shotgun. He had heard my scream, and he had come to help me. He fired again, and the monster fell back, wounded. It let out a final roar, and then it was silent. The ranger ran to me and checked my pulse. He called for backup on his radio, and told me to hang in there. He said he had seen this thing before, and that it was a rare and dangerous creature. He said it was called the chupacabra, and that it preyed on livestock and humans. He said he had been hunting it for a long time, and that he was glad he finally found it. He said he was sorry for what it did to me, and that he would get me to a hospital as soon as possible. I thanked him, and I felt a wave of relief. I was alive, and I was saved. I closed my eyes and I passed out. I always loved camping, but after what happened last summer, I don't think I'll ever go again. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend with my friends, just enjoying nature and having fun. We found a nice spot near a lake, set up our tents, and started a fire. Everything was going well until we heard a loud splash in the water. We looked over and saw a huge alligator emerge from the lake, snapping its jaws and thrashing its tail. It was heading straight for us. We panicked and ran to our cars, leaving behind our tents and belongings. The alligator followed us, faster than we expected. It was almost as if it was hunting us. We managed to get in our cars and drive away, but not before the alligator ripped one of the tires with its teeth. We heard it roar behind us as we sped off. We were terrified and shaken, but also relieved that we escaped. We decided to find a motel and stay there for the night, and then go back to the campsite in the morning to get our stuff. The next day, we drove back to the lake, hoping that the alligator was gone. We were wrong. As soon as we got there, we saw it waiting for us, lying on the shore next to our tents. It looked angry and hungry. It had torn apart our tents and eaten some of our food. It also had something else in its mouth, a human arm. We screamed and backed away, realizing that the alligator had killed someone else who had camped there. We didn't know who it was, but we felt sorry for them. We also felt guilty, because maybe if we had warned someone about the alligator, they would have been alive. We quickly got in our cars and drove away, leaving everything behind. We didn't care about our stuff anymore. We just wanted to get away from that monster. We never went back to that lake, or any other lake for that matter. We also never went camping again. We still have nightmares about that alligator, and the arm in its mouth. We wonder if it's still out there, waiting for its next victim. We hope not, but we're not taking any chances. We're staying away from the woods and sticking to the city. Camping is not worth it. I had always wanted to visit Alaska, the last frontier of America. I had heard so many stories about its wild beauty, its majestic mountains, its abundant wildlife. I had saved up enough money to take a 2-week vacation and booked a flight to Anchorage. From there, I rented a car and drove to one of the best campgrounds in the state, according to my online research, Canopolis Lake State Park, 1-13. The park was located in the Smoky Hills region, about 4 hours away from Anchorage. It had a large reservoir, desert plants, a prairie dog town, and scenic sandstone canyons. It also had several trails for hiking, biking, and horseback riding. I was excited to explore the park and enjoy the nature. I arrived at the park in the afternoon and checked in at the visitor center. The ranger gave me a map and some brochures, and told me to pick any campsite I liked. He also warned me to be careful of bears, wolves, and coyotes, and to store my food properly. He said there had been some reports of animal attacks recently, but nothing serious. He said the park was safe as long as I followed the rules and used common sense. I thanked him and drove to the campground. It was a large area with about 50 campsites, each with a fire ring, a picnic table, and a tent pad. There were also toilets, showers, and a dump station nearby. The campground was almost empty, except for a few RVs and tents. I guess most people preferred to camp in the summer, when the weather was warmer and the days were longer. I didn't mind the cold or the dark. I liked the solitude and the silence. I chose a campsite near the lake, with a nice view of the water and the hills. I set up my tent, unpacked my gear, and made a fire. I cooked some hot dogs and beans, and ate them with bread and mustard. I washed it down with a can of beer, and felt satisfied and happy. I decided to go for a walk around the lake before it got too dark. I put on my jacket, hat, and gloves, and grabbed my flashlight. I also took my pocket knife, just in case. I locked my car and left my campsite. I followed a trail that circled the lake, about 3 miles long. It was a clear and crisp evening, and the stars were shining brightly. I could hear the sounds of the water, the wind, and the animals. I felt peaceful and relaxed. I walked for about an hour, enjoying the scenery and the fresh air. I saw some ducks, rabbits, and squirrels along the way, but no signs of bigger animals. I was halfway around the lake, when I noticed something strange. There was a campsite on the opposite shore, with a tent, a fire, and a car. But there was no one there. The fire was burning low, and the car was still running. The tent flap was open, and there was a sleeping bag and a backpack inside. It looked like someone had just left in a hurry, or had been taken away. I felt a chill run down my spine, and a sense of dread. I wondered what had happened to the camper, and where they were. I wondered if they were in trouble, or if they were the trouble. I wondered if I should go and check, or if I should stay away. I decided to stay away. I didn't want to get involved in something that was none of my business. I didn't want to risk my own safety. I turned around and walked back to my campsite, as fast as I could. I reached my campsite and breathed a sigh of relief. I was glad to see that everything was still there, and nothing was out of place. I decided to call it a night, and get some sleep. I put out the fire, and got into my tent. I zipped up my sleeping bag, and turned off my flashlight. I closed my eyes, and tried to forget about the other campsite. I told myself that it was probably nothing, and that I was just being paranoid. I told myself that I was safe, and that nothing would happen to me. I was wrong. I woke up to a loud noise like a gunshot. I jolted up, and grabbed my flashlight. I turned it on, and looked around. I saw a flash of light, and heard another gunshot. It was coming from the other campsite. I heard a scream, and then silence. I felt a surge of fear, and a rush of adrenaline. I wondered what was going on, and who was shooting. I wondered if I should call for help, or if I should hide. I decided to call for help. I reached for my phone, and dialed 911. But there was no signal. I cursed, and threw my phone aside. I realized that I was alone, and cut off from the outside world. I realized that I was in danger, and that I had to get out of there. I decided to pack up my stuff, and drive away. I got out of my tent, and ran to my car. I threw my gear in the back seat, and got in the driver's seat. I started the engine, and turned on the headlights. I was about to drive away, when I saw something that made me freeze. There was a man standing in front of my car, holding a rifle. He was wearing a camouflage jacket, a hunting hat, and a mask. He had a crazed look in his eyes, and a twisted smile on his lips. He pointed the rifle at me, and pulled the trigger. The last thing I saw was a flash of light, and the last thing I heard was a bang. I had always wanted to spend a weekend in a cabin in the woods, away from the noise and stress of the city. I found a cheap rental online and booked it without hesitation. It looked cozy and rustic, just what I needed. I arrived at the cabin on a Friday evening, after driving for hours on a winding road. The sun was setting and the air was chilly. I grabbed my backpack and entered the cabin. It was dark and dusty inside, but I didn't mind. I found a flashlight and some matches and lit a fire in the fireplace. I felt a wave of relaxation wash over me as I sat on the couch and watched the flames. I decided to explore the cabin a bit. It had 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, a kitchen, and a living room. It was small but comfortable. I noticed some old books and magazines on a shelf, and a radio on a table. I turned on the radio and tuned it to a music station. I heard a crackling sound and a faint voice. "Hello? Is anyone there? Please help me. They're coming for me. They're coming for me. They're coming for me." I froze. The voice sounded terrified and desperate. It repeated the same words over and over. I felt a chill run down my spine. Who was this? Where were they? What was happening? I tried to change the station, but the voice followed me. It was the only thing I could hear. I turned off the radio and threw it on the floor. The voice stopped. I breathed a sigh of relief. It must have been a prank or a hoax, I thought. Some sick joke by the previous renters. I decided to forget about it and go to bed. I was tired and hungry, and I had brought some canned food and water with me. I ate a quick meal and went to the bedroom. I locked the door and crawled into the bed. I pulled the blanket over me and closed my eyes. I hoped to have a good night's sleep. I woke up to a loud bang. It sounded like someone had slammed the door. I jolted up and looked around. It was pitch black. I reached for the flashlight, but it was gone. I felt a surge of panic. What was going on? I heard footsteps outside the bedroom. They were heavy and slow. They stopped at the door. I heard a knock. Then another. Then another. They became louder and faster. Someone was trying to break in. I screamed. I jumped out of the bed and looked for a weapon. I found a knife in the drawer and held it in my hand. I backed away from the door and waited. The knocking stopped. I heard a click. The door opened. I saw a silhouette in the dark. It was tall and thin, with long arms and legs. It had no hair and no face. It was a monster. It stepped into the room and reached for me. I stabbed it with the knife. It let out a horrible shriek and fell to the floor. I ran past it and out of the room. I ran to the living room and looked for the exit. I saw the front door. It was open. I ran towards it. I stopped. I saw another monster standing in the doorway. It was identical to the first one. It blocked my way. It smiled at me. It had no teeth and no eyes. It had a mouth full of blood. It spoke to me. It said, "Hello? We've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for you. We've been waiting for you." I had always wanted to go camping in Utah, so when my friend Jake invited me to join him and his family for a weekend at the River Pond campground, I didn't hesitate to say yes. He said they had rented a cabin near the river, and that there were plenty of things to do in the area, like fishing, hiking, biking, and kayaking. It sounded like a perfect getaway from the city life. I packed my bags and drove to the campground on Friday afternoon. Jake had given me the directions and the cabin number, so I didn't have any trouble finding the place. The campground was spacious and well maintained, with lots of trees and greenery. I parked my car near the cabin and got out. I saw Jake waving at me from the porch. He looked happy and relaxed. "Hey man, you made it," he said, as he came down to greet me. "Welcome to paradise." He gave me a hug and helped me with my luggage. He introduced me to his wife, Lisa, and his 2 kids, Sam and Amy. They were all very friendly and welcoming. They showed me around the cabin, which was cozy and comfortable. It had 2 bedrooms, a living room, a kitchen, and a bathroom. It also had a fireplace, a TV, and a Wi-Fi router. Jake said they had brought their own laptop and some DVDs, in case we got bored at night. We settled in and decided to go for a walk around the campground. Jake said he wanted to show me the river and the trails. He said the river was great for fishing and kayaking, and that there were some rapids downstream that were fun to ride. He also said there were some hiking trails that led to some amazing views of the mountains and the valley. He said he had a map of the area in his backpack, and that we could pick any trail we wanted. We left the cabin and walked towards the river. The sun was shining and the air was fresh. I felt a surge of excitement and anticipation. I loved being in nature, and I couldn't wait to explore this place. Jake seemed to share my enthusiasm. He was talking nonstop about the campground and the things we could do. He said he had been coming here since he was a kid, and that it was his favorite spot in the world. We reached the river and followed its course. The water was clear and cold, and it made a soothing sound as it flowed over the rocks. We saw some people fishing on the banks, and some others kayaking on the water. They all looked happy and relaxed. Jake said he had brought his fishing rod and his kayak, and that we could use them any time we wanted. He said he had also brought some marshmallows and hot dogs, and that we could make a bonfire by the river at night. We continued walking along the river until we reached a fork. Jake said we could either go left or right. He said the left trail led to a waterfall, and the right trail led to a lookout point. He asked me which one I preferred. I said I didn't mind, and that both sounded good. He said he had been to both, and that they were both worth seeing. He said we could flip a coin to decide. He took out a quarter from his pocket and tossed it in the air. He said heads for left, tails for right. He caught the coin and looked at it. "Tails," he said. "We're going right." He put the coin back in his pocket and led the way. He said the trail was not too long, and that it was easy to follow. He said the lookout point had a stunning view of the valley and the mountains. He said we could see the whole campground from there, and maybe even spot some wildlife. He said he had seen deer, elk, and even a bear once. He said we had to be careful and not get too close to them, especially the bear. We followed the trail, which was narrow and winding. It went uphill, through the woods. The trees were tall and thick, and they cast shadows on the ground. The trail was quiet and peaceful, except for the occasional sound of birds and squirrels. Jake said he liked this trail, because it was secluded and serene. He said he felt closer to nature here, and that he sometimes came here to meditate and relax. We walked for about half an hour, until we reached the end of the trail. There was a wooden sign that said, "Lookout Point." There was also a wooden bench and a metal railing. We walked to the edge and looked over the railing. The view was breathtaking. We could see the whole valley below us, with the river winding through it. We could also see the mountains in the distance, with their snow-capped peaks. The sky was blue and clear, and the sun was bright and warm. We felt a gentle breeze on our faces. We sat on the bench and admired the scenery. We didn't say anything, we just enjoyed the moment. We stayed there for a while, until we decided to head back. Jake said we should get back to the cabin before it got dark. He said it was not safe to walk on the trail at night, because it was easy to get lost or run into trouble. He said there were no lights or signs on the trail, and that the woods were full of dangers. He said we should always stick together and never wander off. He said he had a flashlight and a whistle in his backpack, in case of emergency. We got up and walked back to the trail. Jake said we should hurry, because the sun was setting and the night was coming. He said we should be back at the cabin in no time, and that we could have a nice dinner and watch a movie. He said he had brought some pizza and soda, and that we could heat them up in the microwave. He said he had also brought some horror movies, and that we could watch them on his laptop. He said he loved horror movies, and that they were perfect for a camping trip. We followed the trail, which was now darker and quieter. The trees were blocking the sunlight, and the shadows were growing longer. The trail was harder to see, and we had to watch our steps. Jake said we should turn on the flashlight, to make it easier. He took out the flashlight from his backpack and turned it on. He pointed it at the trail, and we walked faster. We walked for about 10 minutes, until we reached the fork. Jake said we should go left, to get back to the river. He said we were almost there, and that we had made good time. He said we should be able to see the cabin from the river, and that we could follow the lights. He said we were lucky, because the campground had electricity and Wi-Fi. He said some campgrounds didn't have those, and that they were more primitive and rustic. He said he preferred this campground, because it had the best of both worlds. It had nature and comfort. We turned left, and followed the trail. We could hear the sound of the river getting louder, and we knew we were close. Jake said we should be able to see it soon, and that we should look for the bridge. He said the bridge was the easiest way to cross the river, and that it was near the cabin. He said we should avoid the rapids, because they were dangerous and fast. He said he had seen some people get hurt or drown there, and that it was not worth the risk. We walked for a few more minutes, until we saw the river. It was dark and cold, and it made a roaring sound as it flowed over the rocks. We could see some white foam and spray, and we knew those were the rapids. Jake said we should stay away from them, and look for the bridge. He said the bridge was a wooden structure, with metal cables and planks. He said it was sturdy and safe, and that it had a sign that said, "River Pond Campground." He said we should be able to see it from here, and that we should look for the lights. We looked around, but we couldn't see the bridge. We couldn't see any lights either. We only saw darkness and water. Jake said we should move closer to the river, and see if we could spot the bridge. He said maybe it was hidden by the trees, or maybe it was farther down the river. He said we should be careful, and not get too close to the edge. He said the river was deep and strong, and that it could sweep us away. We moved closer to the river, and scanned the horizon. We still couldn't see the bridge. We couldn't see anything, except the rapids. Jake said we should keep walking. I had always loved camping, ever since I was a kid. My dad used to take me to different campsites in Idaho, where we lived. He taught me how to pitch a tent, start a fire, and fish in the rivers. He also told me stories about the wildlife, the history, and the legends of the land. He made camping fun and exciting, and I wanted to share that with my girlfriend, Amy. We had been dating for a year, and I thought it was time to take her on a camping trip. She had never been camping before, and I wanted to show her how amazing it was. I did some research, and found a campsite that seemed perfect. It was called River Pond Campground, and it was located in Garden Valley, Idaho, along the middle fork of the Payette River. It had RV and tent camping, with electric and water hookups, and a dump station. It also had a picnic area, a playground, and a volleyball court. It was close to the town, where there were shops, restaurants, and a hot springs resort. It sounded like a great place to spend a weekend. I booked a tent site online, and packed our car with everything we needed. I brought a tent, sleeping bags, pillows, blankets, a cooler, a stove, a lantern, a flashlight, a first aid kit, and some food and drinks. I also brought a fishing rod, a camera, and a guitar. I wanted to make this trip memorable for Amy. We left on Friday morning, and drove for about 2 hours. The scenery was beautiful, with mountains, forests, and fields. We saw some deer, elk, and birds along the way. We arrived at the campground around noon, and checked in at the office. The staff was friendly and helpful, and gave us a map and some brochures. They told us our site number, and wished us a good stay. We drove to our site, and parked our car. The site was spacious and shady, with a fire ring, a picnic table, and a grill. We could see and hear the river, which was clear and sparkling. We unloaded our stuff, and set up our tent. It was easy and quick, and we were proud of our work. We decided to have some lunch, and then explore the area. We ate some sandwiches and chips, and drank some water. We felt refreshed and energized, and ready for some adventure. We grabbed our fishing rod and camera, and walked to the river. It was only a few steps away, and it looked inviting. We found a spot on the bank, and cast our line into the water. We hoped to catch some trout, but we didn't really care. We just enjoyed the view, the sound, and the company. We talked and laughed, and took some pictures. We kissed and cuddled, and felt happy and in love. We didn't catch any fish, but we didn't mind. We had each other, and that was enough. We decided to go back to the campsite, and start a fire. We wanted to roast some marshmallows, and make some s'mores. We also wanted to play some music, and sing some songs. We thought it would be fun and romantic, and a perfect way to end the day. We walked back to the campsite, and gathered some firewood. We arranged it in the fire ring, and lit a match. The fire started easily, and soon we had a nice and cozy fire. We sat on a log, and wrapped a blanket around us. We roasted some marshmallows, and made some s'mores. They were gooey and delicious, and we ate them with delight. We also drank some hot chocolate, and felt warm and fuzzy. I took out my guitar, and tuned it. I asked Amy what song she wanted to hear, and she said, "Anything you want." I smiled, and played her favorite song. It was "Can't Help Falling in Love" by Elvis Presley. I sang along, and looked into her eyes. She smiled, and sang along too. She looked beautiful, and I felt lucky. We finished the song, and clapped. We kissed and hugged. We said, "I love you," and meant it. We felt happy, and content. We decided to go to bed, and snuggle. We put out the fire, and went to the tent. We crawled into our sleeping bags, and cuddled. We whispered sweet nothings, and fell asleep. We slept peacefully, and dreamt of each other. We woke up to a nightmare. A loud, terrifying roar. It sounded like a bear, angry and hungry. We jolted, and panicked. We didn't know what to do. Should we stay in the tent? Should we run out? Should we scream for help? We decided to stay in the tent. We thought maybe the bear would go away, if we didn't make any noise. We hoped we were right. We were wrong. The bear came closer and closer. We could hear its heavy footsteps, and its deep breaths. We could smell its foul odor and its hot breath. We could feel its presence and its power. It reached our tent and pawed at it. It tore the fabric and exposed us. It saw us and growled. It wanted us and attacked. We screamed. We fought. We lost. But I saved. I had always wanted to go camping in Colorado, one of the best states for camping in America. 1:6. I heard it had beautiful scenery, diverse wildlife, and plenty of outdoor activities. So when my friend Jake invited me to join him and his family for a weekend trip to Waukene Journey, a campground near Hays, Kansas, I jumped at the chance. It was only a 6-hour drive from my home in Iowa, and I thought it would be a great opportunity to see a different part of the country. We arrived at the campground on Friday afternoon, and I was impressed by how clean and spacious it was. The campground had 60 sites, some with full hookups, some with just electric, and some with no utilities at all. We chose a pull-through site with electric, water, and sewer, and set up our tents and RV. The campground also had a pool, a playground, a dog park, and a store. It seemed like a perfect place to relax and have fun. Jake and I decided to explore the area a bit, and we found a trail that led to a nearby lake. We grabbed our fishing rods and some snacks, and headed out. The trail was easy to follow, and we enjoyed the fresh air and the sound of birds. The lake was about a mile away, and it looked calm and inviting. We found a spot on the shore, and cast our lines into the water. We hoped to catch some bass or catfish, but we didn't have much luck. We only got a few nibbles, and no bites. We didn't mind though. We were having a good time, just talking and joking around. We shared stories about our lives, our hobbies, our dreams. Jake told me he wanted to be a veterinarian, and I told him I wanted to be a writer. We had a lot in common, and I felt like we were becoming closer friends. We lost track of time, and before we knew it, the sun was setting. We decided to pack up and head back to the campground. We didn't want to be out in the dark, especially since we didn't have a flashlight. We gathered our stuff and started to walk back to the trail. That's when we heard it. A loud, piercing scream. It sounded like a woman, in pain and terror. We froze and looked at each other. We didn't know what to do. Should we go and help? Should we run away? Should we call for help? We decided to go and help. We thought maybe someone was hurt, or attacked by an animal. We dropped our fishing rods and ran towards the source of the scream. We hoped we could make a difference. We were wrong. We ran for about a minute until we reached a clearing. There, we saw a horrifying sight. A woman lying on the ground covered in blood. Her clothes were torn, and her body was mutilated. Her eyes were wide open, and her mouth was twisted in a silent scream. She was dead. Next to her, there was a man. He was also covered in blood, but he was alive. Barely. He was holding a knife, and he was stabbing himself in the chest. Over and over. He was mumbling something, but we couldn't understand what he was saying. He looked insane. We were shocked and scared. We didn't know what to do. We wanted to run away, but we also wanted to help. We wanted to call for help, but we didn't have our phones. We wanted to scream, but we were afraid he would hear us. We stood there, frozen, watching him kill himself. Then he stopped. He dropped the knife and fell to the ground. He was still alive, but barely. He looked at us and smiled. A twisted, bloody smile that he said one word. "Hello?" Then he died. We screamed. We ran. We didn't stop until we reached the campground. We told the staff what we saw, and they called the police. The police came and took us to the station. They asked us a lot of questions, and we told them everything we knew. They told us we were lucky to be alive. They told us the couple we saw were wanted for a series of murders across the country. They told us they had been on the run for months, and they had killed at least 10 people. They told us they didn't know why they did it, or how they ended up at the lake. They told us it was a mystery. We didn't care. We just wanted to go home. We never went camping again. I had rented a small cabin near a lake, surrounded by tall trees. The cabin was quaint and cozy, with a fireplace and a small kitchen. I had brought enough food and supplies to last me the weekend. On the first night, I heard strange noises outside the cabin. It sounded like something was scratching at the door. I tried to ignore it and went back to sleep. But the noise continued, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me. The next day, I decided to explore the woods. I walked for hours, enjoying the fresh air and the beautiful scenery. But as the sun began to set, I realized that I had lost my way. I tried retracing my steps, but everything looked the same. Panic set in as I realized that I might have to spend the night in the woods. As I walked, I saw a small cabin in the distance. I ran towards it, hoping to find help. But as I got closer, I realized that it was the same cabin I had rented. I was confused and scared. How could I have walked in a circle? I went inside the cabin, hoping to find some answers. But the cabin was different now. The walls were covered in strange symbols, and the air was thick with an eerie silence. I felt like I was being watched again. Suddenly, I heard a voice behind me. "You shouldn't have come here," it said. I turned around, but there was no one there. I was alone in the cabin, or so I thought. I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. I slowly climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached the top, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was a man, but his face was hidden in darkness. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. The man stepped forward, and I saw his face. It was my own face, twisted into a grotesque mask. I screamed and ran out of the cabin, not looking back. I never went back to that cabin again. But sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I can still hear the scratching at the door.